Emily woke up early that morning with a feeling in her chest that was a mix of excitement and fear. She had dreamed of this day for months. The prestigious music academy was holding auditions, and for the first time in her life, she was going to play in front of real judges, professionals who could change her future with a single decision. She practiced every night after school, even when she felt tired, even when her fingers ached. She didn't have a fancy piano at home, only an old upright one that her grandfather had given her before he passed away. But she believed that if her heart was in the music, the instrument wouldn't matter. Her mother walked beside her as they entered the academy building, a place that looked more like a mansion than a school. Tall doors, polished floors, and echoing hallways made everything feel bigger, more serious. Children dressed in expensive clothes filled the lobby, holding folders of music sheets. Their parents whispered instructions, some reminding their kids to smile, some telling them not to embarrass themselves. Emily's mother squeezed her hand gently, but Emily felt small among them, like a quiet note lost in a loud song. When they reached the registration table, a woman wearing glasses sat with a clipboard checking names. She looked efficient, strict, and tired, as if she had seen too many hopeful faces that morning. Emily's mother gave her name confidently. The woman scanned her list, frowning slightly. "I don't see her name here," she said flatly. Emily's mother explained that they had registered late because they only heard about the auditions recently. She apologized politely, hoping for understanding, but the woman's expression didn't soften. "We only have a limited number of performance slots," she said. "All pianos are assigned. If she's not on the list, she can't play." Emily felt her stomach twist. It wasn't anger, it was the sting of disappointment, sharp and unexpected. She had imagined nerves, maybe forgetfulness, maybe mistakes, but not this. Not rejection before she could even sit down. Her mother tried to reason with the woman, saying Emily had practiced so hard that she just wanted a chance. But the woman shook her head, not cruelly, just mechanically, like someone who didn't have time for exceptions. Then behind them, parents and children began to talk. Not loudly, but loud enough to hear. Some people glanced at Emily with curious eyes, others with annoyance. One girl whispered to her friend, if she didn't register properly, she shouldn't be here. Another child laughed quietly, as if the situation was funny. Emily stared at the floor, wishing she could disappear into it. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not the embarrassing kind. She wished she could explain that she wasn't irresponsible or unprepared. She wished she could say that she didn't come to show off or prove anything to anyone. She just wanted to play. The woman with the clipboard repeated herself, this time slower, as if Emily and her mother hadn't understood. "There's no piano available. She cannot perform." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it was final, cold, and efficient, like a door closing in someone's face. Emily felt her throat tighten. She nodded politely, pretending she understood, pretending she was okay with it. She wanted to be brave, or at least invisible. But the truth was, her heart felt heavy, as if someone had placed a stone inside it. Her mother looked at her, eyes full of guilt, as though she had failed her daughter. Emily tried to smile to make her mother feel better, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. She looked around at all the other children, confident and polished, ready to perform. None of them seemed afraid. None of them were being turned away. What made Emily different? She knew she didn't look like them. She didn't have a new dress or shiny shoes. She didn't come from a family that could afford private lessons or expensive instruments. But she thought music didn't care about those things. She thought talent and passion were enough. Apparently she was wrong. The worst moment came when someone laughed, not meanly, just dismissively, and said, if she's not registered, she shouldn't expect special treatment. The comment wasn't directed at her, but it hit her like a slap. She wasn't asking for special treatment. She was asking for a chance. But in that place, rules mattered more than dreams. Emily and her mother stepped aside, letting others register, watching as names were checked and performers were assigned times and rooms. Everything moved so smoothly for everyone else. Everything seemed easy, effortless, expected. Emily sat on a bench, clutching her music sheets so tightly that they bent. She stared at the drawings on the carpet pattern, fighting tears that burned behind her eyes. She didn't want to cry in a room full of strangers. She didn't want her sadness to become another thing for people to. Emily sat on the bench, trying to disappear into the crowd. But rejection has a strange way of making a person more visible than ever. People passing by didn't stare directly, but their eyes flicked toward her, full of curiosity, confusion, and judgment. She wished she could hide behind something, anything, but there was nothing on that bench except her and the crumpled music sheets pressed against her chest. The hallway was noisy, filled with confident voices and cheerful laughter. Children compared their songs, showed off their outfits, or bragged about how many competitions they had already won. None of them looked scared. None of them looked like they knew what it felt like to be told you can't before even trying. They were playing the role of stars in the making, bright, bold, and certain of their place in the world. Emily was not like them. She didn't know how to brag. She didn't know how to act like she belonged here. She She just understood music, the quiet kind, the gentle kind, the honest kind. But in that building, loud confidence seemed more important than quiet talent. A girl wearing a sparkling dress walked past her, turning to whisper something to her friend. Emily didn't catch all the words, but she heard the tone sharp, mocking, amused. Maybe she thought this was for amateurs, the girl said. Her friend laughed softly, covering her mouth in an exaggerated way. Emily looked down at her shoes, feeling heat rise in her cheeks, wishing she could shrink into nothing. Her mother clenched her jaw but stayed quiet. She didn't want to start a scene, not in a place where everyone seemed to already believe her daughter didn't belong. Sometimes silence is not agreement, it is survival. Minutes passed slowly, stretching longer than they should. Emily listened to the scattered piano sounds drifting from other rooms. Some were perfect, controlled, professional. Others were messy and loud. But every sound reminded her of what she was missing. She wasn't scared of performing anymore, she was scared of never being allowed to perform at all. The humiliation didn't come from the judges or the staff. It came from being seen as a joke by the people around her, even though none of them knew her, none of them had heard her play, and none of them had a right to judge her. A boy walked up with his father. His posture was tall, confident, the posture of someone who never doubted his place. When they reached the table, the boy announced his name proudly, and the woman instantly smiled at him. "Excellent, you're in room 5, she said. Good luck." Emily watched silently, wondering how different her day would be if someone had smiled at her like that. A smile can build a bridge. A frown can build a wall. She had been given walls all morning. The boy glanced at Emily with a condescending expression, then asked his father, loud enough for her to hear, "Why are people here if they didn't register? It's ridiculous." His father shrugged, nodding in mild agreement, and they walked away as if they belonged to a more important world. Emily felt something collapse inside her, not a loud break, but a small, private tear. She didn't cry, but she felt the sting behind her eyes, that stubborn ache that comes when pride wrestles with sadness. She hated feeling weak. She hated feeling like she needed approval just to exist in this space. Her mother rubbed her back and whispered, "Don't listen to them." But simple advice doesn't erase complex pain. Emily wasn't mad at anyone specifically. She was mad at the situation, the unfairness of being dismissed based on paperwork, the injustice of being judged by appearance, the cruelty of assumptions. She imagined herself on stage, sitting at a grand piano, playing the song she had practiced so carefully. She imagined the notes floating through the air, filling the room, transforming judgment into silence. She imagined people listening, really listening. That dream made her heart ache even more because it was out of reach. For a moment she thought about leaving. She could go home, take off her uncomfortable dress, sit at her old piano, and pretend this day never happened. Nobody would laugh at her there. Nobody would look at her like she didn't belong. At home, the music didn't need permission to exist, but something held her there, stubbornness, hope, or maybe just the feeling that leaving would make the humiliation permanent. If she walked out now, she would always wonder, always regret, always replay the rejection in her mind. Sometimes, staying in a painful place feels harder but more necessary. Just then, another girl walked by, clutching a shiny trophy from a past competition. When she saw Emily, she smirked, not because she knew her, but because she recognized vulnerability. "Maybe you can try next year," she said, pretending to be helpful, but her tone was coated with sugar-coated cruelty. "If you prepare properly." Emily didn't answer, she couldn't. She just looked at the floor and tightened her grip on the sheet music. The humiliation wasn't just external, it was turning inward, telling her that maybe everyone was right, maybe she wasn't meant for this world of polished talent and shining confidence. But deep inside, beneath the embarrassment, beneath the sadness, there lived something solid, something stubborn. A part of her that whispered, not loudly but firmly, "You can play, you know you can play, and someday someone will hear you." She didn't know when, she didn't know how, but humiliation didn't destroy the dream. It simply made it burn brighter, waiting for a chance to escape. Emily sat in the hallway, trying to stay invisible, when a soft voice broke through the noise around her. "Are you waiting to audition?" a man asked. He looked older than the other instructors, with gentle eyes and messy hair, like someone who cared more about music than appearances. Emily nodded shyly, unsure if answering would make things worse. He glanced at the clipboard table where the staff were busy, then looked back at Emily with a concerned expression. "You're not on the list, are you?" he asked. Emily shook her head. She didn't have the energy to explain the whole story again. The man sighed, not in annoyance but in sympathy. "That happens sometimes," he murmured, then added quietly, "but it shouldn't decide whether someone gets to be heard." His tone was calm but determined, as if he had seen too many talented people ignored because they didn't fit a certain mold. He crouched down so he could look Emily in the eyes rather than towering over her like everyone else had. "Did you come here to play piano?" he asked gently. Emily nodded again, clutching her music sheets tighter, afraid they might crumble in her hands. He smiled, not the forced smile adults use to make children feel better, but a real one full of encouragement. Good, he said softly. Then we should at least see what you can do. Before Emily could respond, he stood up and motioned for her to follow him backstage. Her mother looked surprised but hopeful, standing up quickly and gathering Emily's bag. The hallway noise faded as they walked through a side door, into a quieter area filled with stage lights, instruments, and performers warming up. Emily had never been backstage before. It felt like entering a secret world, a world where voices whispered instead of shouted and music echoed instead of drowned. The man guided Emily to a chair in the corner. "You can wait here," he said. "I can't promise anything, but I'll see if we can find a moment for you to play." His voice didn't sound like empty comfort. It sounded like a promise from someone who valued fairness. Emily sat down, unsure how to feel. She didn't know if this was hope or just a different kind of waiting. But being here felt better than being in the hallway, where eyes judged and laughter hurt. Backstage, people were focused on their music, not on each other. This was not a place of competition, it was a place of preparation. She watched performers rehearse, each one different from the others. One girl played a complicated piece so quickly that her fingers blurred. A boy practiced a dramatic entrance trying to look confident, but his hands shook slightly. Another child sat quietly, whispering the lyrics of her song to herself with closed eyes as if memorizing was a prayer. Emily didn't feel jealous. She felt connected. They were all just kids trying to do something brave. Even though Emily didn't have a piano to rehearse on, she practiced in her mind. She imagined placing her hands on the keys, imagined the first note, the second, the flow of the melody. She had played her piece so many times at home that it lived in her fingers like muscle memory. Her grandfather used to tell her, "If you can hear the music in your mind, you'll never forget it." She believed him not because he was wise but because he was kind. Time passed slowly. Emily didn't know if it had been 10 minutes or an hour. Performers went on stage and returned with flushed faces, some smiling proudly, some disappointed. Every time someone walked past her, she looked up, wondering if her turn would come. But no one called her name, and nobody knew she was waiting. At one point, a group of performers noticed her and whispered, "Is she performing too?" One asked, "I don't recognize her." Another shrugged, saying maybe she got lost. They weren't mean, just curious. But curiosity sometimes stings just as deeply as cruelty when you already feel small. Emily's mother sat beside her quietly, resting a hand on her shoulder. She didn't push her to smile, didn't tell her to be patient, didn't make promises she couldn't keep. She just sat with her, sharing the silence. Sometimes support isn't loud, it is simply presence. The kind instructor passed by a few times, checking schedules, talking with staff, arguing quietly with someone near the stage entrance. Emily couldn't hear what he was saying, but his face showed frustration on her behalf, not his own. It was rare to see an adult care about something that didn't benefit them. Finally, he walked over to her again. He kneeled slightly like before and said, "There may be a spot opening soon, don't go anywhere. If we get a chance, it will be short notice." Emily nodded quickly, fear and excitement mixing in her stomach like fizzy soda. She didn't care if the opportunity came with a warning or a countdown. She just wanted a chance. While waiting, Emily listened to another child finish performing on stage. The applause sounded polite, not emotional. Emily thought about what applause felt like. She didn't dream of thunderous clapping or standing ovations. She dreamed of connection, of someone hearing her and understanding what she tried to express. The instructor returned again, this time with a quicker step. His voice was low but urgent. "We're almost there," he whispered, glancing toward the stage. "Just stay ready." Emily's heart began to race. She didn't know if she would actually play, but suddenly the possibility felt real. She looked at the piano waiting on stage, glowing under the lights. It didn't scare her, not anymore. It felt like home. A home she wasn't sure she would ever reach, but one that waited patiently just in case. Backstage, surrounded by strangers and uncertainty, Emily realized something important. Rejection had pushed her down, but hope had pulled her back up. And sometimes, all a dream needs is one person to say, "Wait, don't leave yet." Emily didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she wasn't invisible anymore. The backstage area grew busier as the auditions continued. Performers walked in and out, carrying their nerves with them like invisible bags. Some returned smiling proudly, others walked with slumped shoulders, wiping eyes quickly so no one would notice. Emily watched them all, her own emotions swinging between hope and fear. She felt like she was standing on a cliff. One move could send her flying or falling. She kept glancing toward the piano on stage. It sat there, polished and beautiful, reflecting the bright lights above it. It looked like it belonged to someone important, someone confident. Emily had never played a piano that expensive before. Her old one at home was chipped, slightly out of tune, and creaked when she pressed too hard. But she loved it anyway because it was hers. Still, the thought of touching a grand piano like that filled her with a strange excitement. Then chaos happened, quiet, small chaos, but important. One of the performers, a boy wearing a suit with perfect hair, walked toward the stage entrance looking pale. He had rehearsed loudly backstage earlier, showing off his speed and skill, but now he stood with his arms crossed tightly, as if he was protecting himself from something. The instructor helping Emily noticed him immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked. The boy mumbled something, staring at the floor. Emily didn't hear all of it, but she caught one word: sick. His mother rushed forward, telling the staff that he couldn't perform. He felt dizzy, his stomach hurt, and he was suddenly too weak to go on stage. The staff member nodded reluctantly and crossed his name off the list. "We'll need to move on," she said. Then she looked at the instructor, unaware of the storm of possibility her words had just created. The instructor turned sharply toward Emily. His eyes met hers, full of urgency and hope. "You're up," he whispered. Emily froze. The world felt too fast, too big, too bright. Her heart began pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She wasn't ready, at least her fear insisted she was. She hadn't warmed up. She hadn't practiced on this piano. She hadn't prepared for a sudden moment like this. But dreams rarely come dressed in comfort. They often show up unexpectedly, forcing you to decide whether to run toward them or away from them. "Come with me," the instructor said, gently but firmly. Emily stood up so quickly that her legs almost gave out. Her mother squeezed her hand before letting go, whispering, "You can do this." Her voice was shaky, but her belief was steady. As Emily walked toward the stage entrance, some of the performers stared. A few of them looked surprised. Others looked annoyed, as if she were intruding on their world. One kid whispered, "Who is she?" Another replied, "She's the extra, they're just filling time." Their words stabbed softly, but Emily didn't stop walking. If she stopped now, she feared she might never move again. The instructor bent slightly toward her as they reached the stage curtain. "Don't worry about them," he said quietly. "This is your moment." Emily nodded, even though her legs trembled beneath her dress. She peeked through the curtain. The audience looked bigger from this angle than it had earlier. Rows and rows of faces, chatter, movement. A sea of strangers waiting for something, anything. The host stood on stage looking frustrated and rushed. He seemed eager to keep the show moving. When he saw Emily behind him, confusion flickered across his face. He whispered sharply to the instructor, "This is the replacement." The instructor nodded. The host sighed as if expecting disaster, then stepped up to the microphone. "Next performer," he said, sounding tired, "is Emily." He paused, glancing at his paper, surprised there was no last name. "Emily," he repeated with no energy, no excitement. There was no applause, just a collective murmur. Some audience members looked confused. Others leaned back in their seats, already dismissing her. A girl in the front row whispered loudly enough to hear, "Where'd she come from?" Someone else snickered. Emily walked onto the stage, feeling like she was stepping into cold water. Everything inside her screamed to turn around, to run, to hide. But she kept walking, one step then another, until she reached the piano. Her hands shook, not dramatically but enough for her to notice. She was scared, not of failing, but of wasting this moment she had waited for all day. She sat on the bench slowly, breathing in through her nose, out through her mouth, remembering how her grandfather used to tell her, "Music isn't about perfection. It's about honesty." She placed her music sheets on the stand, even though she knew the song by heart. Her fingers hovered above the keys, nervous and stiff. The noise of the audience felt louder now, chattering, shifting, judging. Emily closed her eyes. Just for a second, she imagined her old piano. She imagined her bedroom, quiet and safe. She imagined her grandfather sitting beside her, humming along with every note. For that split moment, the world shrank into something small and gentle. Then she exhaled and opened her eyes. The stage, the audience, the lights, it all returned, but she wasn't frozen anymore. She wasn't ready because she wasn't supposed to be ready. She was supposed to be brave. With a steady breath, she lowered her hands to the keys, preparing to play, not to impress the crowd, not to win judges' approval, but to prove to herself that being told "there's no piano for you" didn't mean she didn't deserve to be heard. She touched the first note, soft and cautious, unaware that this tiny sound would begin to change everything. The first note Emily played was quiet, so quiet that it felt more like a question than a statement. It slipped into the air gently, almost shyly, yet something about it made a few people in the front row turn their heads. They weren't impressed yet, just curious. Most of the audience didn't notice anything special. They continued whispering, shifting in their seats, waiting for the real performance to begin. But Emily didn't rush. She let the first 3 notes float one after another, each soft but deliberate, like someone whispering a secret. Her fingers trembled slightly, but not from lack of skill, just fear. She wasn't afraid of the piano, she was afraid of the eyes staring at her, waiting for her to fail. Her heart thumped loudly in her chest. She remembered the hallway, the clipboard, the woman who said she didn't belong. For a moment, those memories threatened to choke her. But then she imagined her grandfather's voice, gentle but steady, saying, "Close your eyes and find the music inside you." So she did. She closed her eyes briefly, even though she never practiced that way. And when she opened them again, something changed. Her breathing slowed, her fingers relaxed, Her shoulders loosened and she sank deeper into herself. The next notes were stronger, still soft but clearer, like a river flowing instead of dripping. The melody began, a gentle rise and fall, familiar like an old lullaby, but powerful like a memory you didn't know you had until someone reminded you. The audience noise faded slowly, almost without them realizing it. One by one, heads turned toward the stage. Conversations ended mid-sentence. The host, who had been scrolling through his phone, looked up with surprise. Because the music wasn't just nice. It wasn't just good. It was honest. It was the sound of someone who had never been allowed to speak finally speaking. Emily's fingers moved faster now, weaving notes together with purpose. Her small hands stretched across the keys, hitting chords that echoed through the hall, not loud but full. She didn't play aggressively like some performers did when they wanted attention. She played with emotion, soft, gentle, but unwavering. The judges leaned forward in their seats. One raised an eyebrow, another set down her pen. They didn't know her name, her background, or why she appeared suddenly, but they recognized something real. And real talent doesn't need introduction. The kids who had laughed earlier now stared in silence, unsure how to react. The boy in the sparkly jacket who had shown off backstage felt heat in his face, not anger but embarrassment. He wasn't used to being surprised. He wasn't used to someone quiet outshining him without trying. Emily continued, lost in her own world. She wasn't thinking about the audience anymore. She wasn't thinking about winning or impressing or proving anything. She was thinking about the story her song told, the emotions it carried, the places it came from. Her melody shifted, becoming brighter, lighter, as if sunlight suddenly broke through clouds. A few audience members smiled subconsciously, not knowing why the music made them feel warm. It wasn't cheerful in a childish way. It was hopeful, tender, like someone whispering, "Keep going, even when the world shuts doors." Halfway through, Emily hit a note slightly harder than planned. Not enough to ruin anything, but enough to remind her that she was human. For a split second, panic flickered in her chest. But she kept going. She didn't flinch or hesitate. She shaped the mistake into part of the story, turning imperfection into beauty. And that, more than anything, made her performance feel alive. The music climbed into a soft climax, nothing flashy or dramatic, but emotionally powerful. It felt like a release, like tears held back finally falling quietly. A few people in the audience wiped their eyes discreetly, embarrassed to be moved by a child they didn't know. Even the strict judge, the one known for never smiling, felt something tug inside her chest. She wasn't sentimental. She wasn't easily impressed. But the music reminded her of a piece she used to play as a child, a piece she abandoned when competitions turned music into pressure instead of joy. She swallowed back an unexpected knot in her throat. Emily's mother stood at the edge of the curtain, watching her daughter with wet eyes. Not because she was proud in a loud way, but because she could see the transformation happening on that stage. She knew that Emily wasn't just playing notes. She was rewriting a moment in her life that had tried to break her. She was rewriting a moment in her life that had tried to break her. The instructor who had given Emily this chance stood beside her mother, arms folded, smiling to himself. He had seen many performances in his life, some brilliant, some loud, some technically perfect, but this was different. He was watching courage disguised as music. Near the end of the piece, Emily slowed down again, letting the melody soften and dissolve like a fading memory. She wanted the audience to feel not just what she had played, but the silence that followed. That silence mattered just as much as any note. The final chord was so gentle it almost disappeared before reaching the back row. She held it for a moment, then lifted her fingers slowly, letting the sound fall away like a sigh. The room didn't clap immediately, not because they didn't care, but because they weren't ready to break the moment. In the quiet, Emily lifted her head, breathing shakily. She hadn't looked at the audience once during her performance. And yet, without seeing them, she had changed them. Her music had started as a whisper. Now it lived in every person in the room, and none of them would forget how it made them feel. When the final note disappeared, Emily sat frozen on the bench, her fingers lingering in the air above the piano keys as if they were afraid to break the magic she had created. She didn't know if she should move or wait. She didn't know if she should smile, stand, or look at the audience. For a moment she simply existed, half child, half musician, somewhere between fear and triumph. The audience sat in complete silence. Not the awkward kind of silence, but the stunned kind. It wasn't what anyone expected. Not from a girl who had been told a few hours earlier that there was no place for her. Not from someone who looked so small, so ordinary, so easy to ignore. The host stood at the edge of the stage, mouth slightly open, looking at her as if he wasn't sure whether to walk forward or stay still. He had seen countless auditions that day, loud, flashy, confident performances, but none of them had created a silence this heavy, this meaningful. Then somewhere in the back, a single pair of hands started clapping. Slowly, softly, almost respectfully. It wasn't loud applause, not enthusiastic cheering, just gentle recognition. Others joined hesitantly as if afraid to disturb something sacred. The applause grew louder, spreading across the room, filling the silence with an energy that didn't feel like celebration but appreciation. Emily didn't stand immediately. She wasn't sure if she had done well or if people were being polite. She was too used to being overlooked to believe she could be admired. But when she finally looked at the crowd, she saw faces she didn't recognize, eyes filled with surprise, with softness, with something close to admiration. Nobody looked amused anymore. Nobody looked impatient. The audience wasn't judging her now, they were honoring her, not because she had been perfect, but because she had been honest. Emily slowly stood from the piano bench, her knees shaking so badly she thought she might fall. She attempted a small bow, awkward and unsure, not like the confident children who practiced their bows in front of mirrors. But the audience clapped louder when she did, as if offering her stability with sound. Then something unexpected happened. The boy who had been backstage earlier, the one who was supposed to perform before falling ill, entered through a side door, watching her with half-open eyes. He wasn't angry or bitter. He looked impressed, almost relieved that someone worthy had filled his place. The judges sat still, staring at her like they weren't sure what to write on their score sheets. One of them finally picked up her pen, but instead of writing numbers, she scribbled fast notes, trying to capture something she had felt rather than seen. Emily didn't know that she had moved a judge who rarely felt anything at auditions anymore. The host finally walked toward her, clearing his throat, trying to regain his usual confidence. "Thank you, Emily," he said into the microphone, voice slightly shaky. "Thank you for sharing that with us." His tone wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't performed, it was human. Emily nodded shyly, then hurried off the stage, her face flushed. She didn't wait for more applause, she didn't scan the audience for approval, she just needed to breathe. Backstage, Emily collapsed into her mother's arms. She didn't cry, but she held tightly, as if afraid she might float away if she let go. Her mother whispered, "I'm so proud of you," over and over again, her voice shaking with tears she had been holding since the first note. The instructor who had given her a chance stood nearby, smiling with quiet satisfaction. He didn't rush to congratulate her. He didn't make a speech. He simply said, "I knew you had something worth hearing." His eyes were warm, not proud of what he had done, but proud of what she had done. Emily didn't know how to respond. Words felt too small for the feeling inside her chest. She wanted to say thank you, but she also wanted to say something bigger, something like, "You saved me today." But all that came out was a tiny, emotional whisper, "I'm glad you listened." The instructor nodded. He knew exactly what she meant. Meanwhile, backstage performers stood in quiet clusters, whispering. Some looked inspired, others intimidated. A girl in a sparkling dress bit her lip, suddenly aware that skill wasn't the same as soul. A boy who had bragged earlier sat on a chair, staring at his sheet music, wondering if his performance would feel empty now. Emily didn't hear any of it. She didn't realize that she had changed the atmosphere, turned competition into reflection, turned arrogance into humility. She was too busy processing what had happened, too busy replaying every note in her head, terrified she had made mistakes, unaware of how little they mattered. A few performers approached her shyly, offering small compliments. "That was really good," one said. "I liked your song," another added. Their voices were soft, unsure, but genuine. Emily nodded politely, cheeks burning. She wasn't used to being seen, much less admired. Later, as she sat on a bench backstage, waiting for results she didn't care about anymore, she realized something important. She had survived rejection. She had survived humiliation. She had survived fear. And she hadn't just survived, she had created something beautiful from it. Her performance wasn't loud, it wasn't perfect, it wasn't planned, it was honest. And honesty had changed everything. Emily didn't know if she would ever perform on a stage like this again. She didn't know if she would ever be famous or recognized or celebrated. She didn't know if she would win anything that day. But she knew one thing for certain. No one could ever again look at her and say, "There's no piano for you." After Emily's performance, the backstage atmosphere changed in a way no one expected. The area that once buzzed with nervous chatter and competitive energy now felt quieter, heavier, more thoughtful. As if everyone had been reminded of something important, something they had forgotten in their rush to impress. Performers who had practiced dramatic gestures or loud, complicated pieces now sat silently, listening to the muffled applause still echoing from the stage. It wasn't applause for them. It was applause for a girl they hadn't even noticed a few hours earlier. A girl who wasn't meant to be there. A girl who had been told no before she had even spoken. The boy with the sparkly jacket who had been bragging backstage earlier leaned against the wall, arms crossed tightly. He didn't look angry. He looked unsettled. It was the strange discomfort that comes when you realize you're not as extraordinary as you thought, and that someone quieter, humbler, and gentler just did something you weren't brave enough to do. A girl sitting next to him whispered, "She was really good," almost afraid to say it out loud. He didn't answer. He just stared straight ahead, jaw tight, like he was fighting with thoughts he didn't want to admit. The instructor who had given Emily the chance walked through backstage slowly, receiving silent nods from staff members who had doubted his decision earlier. They didn't apologize, they simply acknowledged that they had been wrong. Emily sat with her mother on a bench, hands still shaking, cheeks pink from emotion. She wasn't afraid anymore, but she wasn't comfortable either. She didn't know how to handle the weight of what she had just done. Her mother rubbed her back gently, whispering small words of comfort, though Emily barely heard them. She felt like she was floating between worlds, between the life she knew and something new that had opened. Children began walking past her, some pretending not to look, others staring openly. A boy about her age stopped in front of her, clutching his violin case nervously. He swallowed before speaking. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. Emily opened her mouth, but no words came. She managed a small smile. The boy nodded awkwardly and hurried away, embarrassed by his own courage. Another girl, older than Emily, approached next. She didn't smile, she didn't act friendly. She just stared at Emily for a long moment and said very gently, "I wish I could play like that." The sentence wasn't jealous, it was honest, full of admiration and frustration at her own limitations. Then she walked away before Emily could reply. Emily began to understand something. Her performance hadn't just impressed people. It had reached them. It had touched something inside them that talent alone couldn't reach. But not everyone reacted with kindness. A group of girls stood whispering in a corner, eyeing Emily with complicated expressions. Their voices were low, but Emily caught pieces of their conversation. "She only played because someone dropped out. She got lucky. It wasn't that amazing." The words stung even though they weren't shouted. Jealousy never needs volume, it hurts just as deeply in whispers. Emily looked down at her hands, wondering if she really had been lucky, if she really deserved what she received. But before doubt could grow too strong, the instructor approached her again. He sat next to her mother, speaking softly. "Sometimes when something real happens, it scares people, it makes them question themselves. Not everyone handles that well." Emily nodded slowly, trying to understand. She was just beginning to realize that performing wasn't just about music, it was about emotions, reactions, impact. And impact wasn't always gentle. The results of the audition eventually came in, printed on sheets of paper and taped to the wall. Performers crowded around, pushing and stretching to see their names. Emily stayed seated not because she didn't care, but because she didn't want to be crushed in the wave of bodies. She didn't have expectations. She didn't know if she deserved a place among these confident, trained musicians. She just wanted to see her name somewhere, proof that she existed, that her music mattered. But when the crowd parted slightly, Emily's heart jumped. She saw her name not at the top, not in the first place, but there, clearly written, "Emily accepted." Her fingers trembled as she stared. She hadn't just been heard, she had been chosen. Not out of pity, not because someone felt sorry for her, but because she earned it. Her mother covered her mouth to keep from crying. The instructor smiled widely, looking relieved, as if this result mattered as much to him as it did to her. Some performers looked happy for her, others looked annoyed, a few looked crushed. Emily didn't know how to react. She wasn't used to being a winner, she wasn't used to being anything more than invisible. Meanwhile, staff members began clearing the stage, preparing for the next group of performers. The judges left their table, faces exhausted, eyes red, not from boredom but from emotion. One judge walked silently past Emily, paused, and said without turning around, "You reminded us why we started doing this." Then she kept walking. Later, as Emily prepared to leave, she passed the same registration desk where hours earlier someone had told her, "There's no piano for you." The woman avoided eye contact, pretending to be busy. Emily didn't feel angry, she didn't feel triumphant. She just felt different, older somehow, heavier with experience. She walked out of the building with her mother and the instructor beside her. The evening air was cool and clean, filling her lungs with relief. No crowds, no judges, no pressure, just silence. Emily looked up at the night sky full of stars. She didn't know if the world would remember her performance. She didn't know if she would ever perform again, but she knew this: someone had once tried to take away her chance to speak. And she had spoken anyway, not loudly, not perfectly, but honestly. And honesty, she realized, has a way of changing everything. Whisper about. Her mother sat beside her quietly, not knowing what to say. Comfort sometimes needed silence, not speeches. The hallway was filled with bright laughter, confident voices, and piano notes floating from practice rooms. But to Emily, everything sounded distant, muted, like she was underwater. She wondered if her music mattered at all. She wondered if all those hours spent practicing, dreaming, imagining this moment meant anything. Being rejected without playing felt worse than messing up on stage. At least a mistake would be her fault. But this wasn't about ability. It wasn't about music, it was about rules, and she had broken one she didn't know existed. She wasn't given a chance to prove herself. She wasn't given a chance to fail. She wasn't given a chance to try. And that kind of rejection left a deeper bruise, one that made her wonder if she belonged in a place like this at all. Weeks passed after the audition, but the impact of Emily's performance didn't fade. People at the academy still talked about her, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in loud conversations that carried down the hallways. They didn't talk about her because she won first place, she didn't. They talked about her because she had arrived as a nobody, faced rejection, and walked off stage having changed something in everyone who listened. At school, Emily didn't brag about her achievement. She didn't tell stories or show off the acceptance letter. Most of her classmates didn't even know what happened. The few who did heard it from their parents, who had been at the audition and told the story like it was something miraculous. But Emily didn't feel like a miracle. She just felt like a girl who finally got a chance. Her mother framed the acceptance letter and hung it on the wall at home. Every time Emily walked past it, she felt a mix of disbelief and pride. She thought she would feel powerful if something like this ever happened, but instead she felt humbled. She knew she didn't win because she was the best musician there. She won because, for a few minutes, she played with truth instead of fear. The instructor who helped her became a constant figure in her life. He invited her to lessons at the academy, not because she was now officially accepted, but because he believed in her potential. During their first lesson, he said, "Music is about connection. You already know how to do that. My job is to help you shape it." They practiced not just speed and accuracy, but emotion. He taught her how to make soft notes meaningful, how to use pauses as part of the story, how to trust her instincts. He wasn't training her to win competitions, he was training her to tell stories. Sometimes, when other students saw her, they gave her curious looks. Some approached her quietly to ask for help with difficult pieces. Others avoided her because her existence challenged their belief that talent only came from expensive training and perfect backgrounds. The girl who once laughed at her at the audition eventually changed too. One day, she stood beside Emily in the practice room doorway, watching her play with a thoughtful expression. "You make it look easy," she said. Emily paused, lifting her fingers from the keys. "It's not easy," she replied softly. "I just feel it a lot." The girl nodded slowly, as if those words answered a question she didn't know how to ask. She didn't apologize for her earlier behavior, but something in her eyes said she regretted it. Not all lessons were musical. Some were painful. Some students still judged, still whispered, still compared themselves unfairly. But Emily learned something valuable. People whisper because they're insecure, not because they're cruel. Sometimes, late at night, Emily played on her old piano at home, the one with chipped paint and keys that clacked loudly. The instrument wasn't perfect, but it was the one that shaped her. It was where she learned patience, discipline, imagination. She didn't wish for a better piano anymore. She realized that greatness doesn't come from expensive tools, it comes from a willing heart. Her grandfather's memory remained at the center of her music. Each time she played a sentimental piece, she felt as though he was sitting beside her, nodding gently, keeping time with his foot. She remembered the evenings when he would sit quietly, eyes closed, listening as if she were already a master. She never understood why he believed so strongly in her, but now she finally felt worthy of that belief. The audition became a story people told their children, a story of resilience and courage. Parents repeated the line, they told her there was no piano for her, but she played anyway. In coffee shops, teachers quoted her performance during lessons. The judges, who had listened to thousands of performers over the years, remembered her name not because of her technique, but because of how she made them feel. Not everyone gets a chance to change the hearts of strangers. Emily didn't plan it, she didn't chase it. She just stepped into a moment that almost didn't exist and shaped it with honesty. Months later, the Academy held another audition, this time for a special concert featuring standout students. Posters hung everywhere with the names of the finalists, and Emily's name was printed in bold letters. She would perform in front of a much larger audience under brighter lights. When she learned she made the list, she didn't jump or scream. She simply sat quietly on her bed, letting the news settle into her heart. She wasn't scared this time. She wasn't worried about judgment or rejection. She knew that whatever happened, she would play honestly, and that would be enough. On the night of the concert, as she walked backstage, some of the staff smiled warmly at her. The same staff who once turned her away now greeted her with respect. Not because she impressed them with perfection, but because she reminded them of something pure. As she waited for her turn, she touched the piano lightly, feeling the smooth surface under her fingertips. She remembered the first time she sat at a piano in this building, uninvited, unwelcomed, but determined. She whispered to herself, not loudly but with certainty, "You belong here." And she did. Emily walked onto the stage with steady steps, not seeking applause, not seeking victory. She walked into the light because she had earned it. She sat at the piano, breathed deeply, and began to play quietly, honestly, fearlessly. She didn't know if she would become famous. She didn't know if the world would remember her name. But she knew this: someone once tried to deny her a place. And she made one for herself with music, with courage, with heart. Self with music, with courage, with heart.